Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Professor March, 10 minutes.
A lot of small points, but there are some very important ones to make. One is, of course, that the blacks that we have in Nova Scotia came up to us almost to a person escaping from the persecution of America, so that the reason we have trouble with the blacks, of course, is very, very similar to the reason they have trouble. We simply got the blacks that escaped from the racism in America and came to try and get a better life in the British Empire. We didn't do a very good job. I'm not pretending we did. The question here is whether if we did a better job, that would be a salutary thing. The heart of Jared's argument is the old-fashioned notion, mostly from the Roman Catholic Church, that there is such a thing as human nature. And he extends that notion that you've got to be realistic about human nature. And of course, when he says that, what he means is that it can't be changed. Now, in fact, human nature has changed enormously, because that's what human culture is all about. We can be many, many different kinds of people. We can create many, many different kinds of society. The genius of the human being is his or her ability to adapt with intelligence. We're an extraordinarily intelligent animal, and that gives us the ability to learn. And to learn means, among other things, to change your behavior, to change your attitudes, to change your values. So this whole dreadful idea that there is such a thing as human nature that puts an absolute limit on it is an ancient idea which in modern sociology and philosophy has been given the lie. There is not a static human nature in the sense that you should be able to extrapolate from that nature to the kind of society that you must have. In fact, modern anthropology shows that the same person placed in a society with varying values, varying techniques, varying systems of cohabitation, etc., can adjust to that. So human nature is flexible, it's plastic, and it's extremely important not to make the mistake of thinking that blacks have some areas in their nature that is somehow inflexible, that they can't learn, that they can't adjust, that they can't change. Another deep problem, I suppose, in his remarks is this notion that the blacks and Hispanics are into all this crime and the use of crack cocaine, etc., on account of their human nature. And the human nature, of course, different from the one that Jared has. And of course, Jared never uses crack cocaine and never commits crimes. But of course, we can find lots of white people who do crack cocaine, and we can ask ourselves, what is it that the Hispanics, the blacks, and the white people who use crack cocaine have in common? Well, golly, guess what it is? It's an addictive drug. And it's an addictive drug to significant numbers of people in every racial group that he would point to. Some may be more susceptible than others. I wouldn't be distressed by discovering that. It may well be that the American Indian, for example, having grown up in societies where there was lots of fresh water, they never had to acclimatize to the production of alcohol so that they could have drinkable water, despite the fact of large conglomeration of people, and so they never adapted to the use of alcohol, and we discover in them a weakness for alcohol. Again, can they be made to adapt? Yes. Lots of people have managed to overcome the tendency to become addicted, if one is Indian, to alcoholic beverages. The fundamental notion we're arguing about tonight doesn't need to go into scientific details of the truth. If you understand the notion of human nature itself is an ancient and pernicious concept, and replace it with a modern concept, which is an anthropological concept of the extreme adaptability of human beings, then you realize that all of Jared's fiddling with the details of the natures of the Hispanics or the blacks or whatever is in fact a self-apology. It's a system of blaming them for troubles which are the problems of the American society. Now, what would be the advantage to the United States if they had a racially diverse society instead of a variety of different societies trying to get along, and where they rub on the edges, thieving from each other, shooting each other, being contemptuous of each other, etc.? The advantage of a truly racially diverse society in America would be that these people would live together, that the Americans would see to the proper education of everyone, whatever their color, and that Americans could walk safely through each other's neighborhoods. Is such a thing an advantage? Is it an advantage to be free from crime? A racially diverse society would be an America where the blacks and the whites did not impose burdens of violence, burdens of stolen property on each other. You would see them living together peacefully and happily. Jared is mystified. How could that be a benefit? I mean, on the one hand, he wants to list off all the terrible things that follow from racial diversity. And my answer is, nirvana, Jared, for you would be not having these problems. You would then have a racially diverse society in the real sense. A society is not a group of people living apart. A society is a single entity where all the different kinds of people are respected and treated equally and properly, not something which you can boast of. And my complaint, of course, is that when he looks across Canada and listens to all these people complaining about the problem of racial discrimination, which is still real in Canada, without any doubt, he is blind to the fact that by comparison to America, we are universally in the world regarded as the home of tolerance and peacefulness. Why? Not because we're without racial prejudice or without problems of discrimination. Of course we still have those problems. But what he's done is simply to emphasize statements by people who are ensconced in the battle against racial discrimination and has failed to notice the obvious, that Canada, by comparison to America, is heaven on earth from a racial point of view. Heaven on earth. We live well and peacefully. And the testament of all the other nations when they're polled and asked whether there is racial tolerance in Canada or whether there is in America, the lie is put by the third parties. It's clear that America loses. She's at the bottom of the list of nations that are respected for their racial tolerance, whereas Canada is near the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor March. Mr. Taylor, 5 minutes for closing arguments.
Yes. This will be my last opportunity to address you, so I will take this opportunity to point out that Professor March still has not given us a single advantage of racial diversity. He's told us over and over how wonderful it would be if racial diversity could be made to work. How lovely it would be if we could all love each other and live together peacefully. He's said this I don't know how many times, but it hasn't happened. It simply hasn't happened. He also says human nature can be changed. Well, that reminds me of an attempt made to change human nature that dates back to the early part of the 20th century. Communism. Communism was based on a very appealing idea, the idea that somehow human nature could be changed, that selfishness could be overcome, that people really could be taught to live from each according to his ability to each according to his need. This was a very appealing idea, almost as appealing perhaps as the notion that race could be made not to matter. The Soviet Union staggered on under this idea for 70 years. Many other nations attempted it. Why did communism fail? Why did this noble view of human nature fall asunder? Because it was a misreading of human nature. We now understand that there is a certain basic selfishness in human beings that it is folly to attempt to overcome. We must harness that selfishness by means of the free market, and that makes a better and more successful society, not this happy notion that somehow selfishness can be made to go away. It doesn't work. It didn't work. And likewise, it is not going to work, this idea that race can be made to go away. I would point out again, Professor March has not given me a single example of a country where racial diversity is providing a strength. He has said Canada is heaven on earth for racial diversity. Well, I'd like to ask Wade McKell that. That's the man in Toronto School Board who says integration has so failed black students in Toronto that he wants segregated schools. Is Canada really heaven on earth for him? The idea, somehow, that we can build a society based on an illusion and good intentions. It is appealing. I used to think that way myself. And I resisted for years giving up that illusion. I wanted to be an optimist and an idealist too. But we have to be realistic. Professor March says there's no such thing as human nature. Well, look at history. Look at every society. One example that I would give is this. I love my children more than I love the children of anyone else in the world. And I make no apologies for that. There have been attempts to raise children communally, in communes, and say, no, no, that's selfishness, that's wrong. You can't care more for your children than my children. Didn't work. People care for their own children more than they care for the children of others. It's human nature. Furthermore, I would make an analogy a little bit further. I don't love my children more than I love the children of others because they're objectively superior. I love them because they're mine. That's all it takes. And it doesn't mean that I dislike your children. In fact, I can work up quite an affection, perhaps, for your children. I feel no hostility for your children. But my children come first because they are mine. Now, a race is a person's extended family. It is the largest group to which human beings feel a kind of natural, instinctive loyalty. It is their large, large family. And they have a loyalty to their race that is like my love for my children. It is one that puts a certain group first without the slightest hostility to any other group. And if whites have set aside this natural loyalty, if they have given up this healthy notion of who they are and liking who they are, if they let their societies drift out of their control, then they will find themselves minorities in their own country. Will that be a good thing? What if there's only a 15% chance that a third world, a population third world Canada will be like the third world? What if there's just a 10% chance? What if there's just a 1% chance that I'm right? Don't you think that possibility should be prevented? Canada and the United States do not owe their countries to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Peter March, you have.
I think the example of the family is a very useful one. Jared says it is natural for us to love our own children more than the children of others. But you see, the fallacy in that argument is glaring. In lots of families, a child is adopted. In many families in Canada, the adopted child is of a different race from the original family. And if we take what he says seriously, that child becomes my child, and we prefer it, despite the fact that it's of mixed race, perhaps, or of a race different from that of the parents, and nevertheless there is a bond, and that person becomes the favorite, my favorite. So if Jared had thought for a moment about this example, he would have immediately seen that the example of adoption shows that he's entirely wrong, even on the general argument of race. People can join my social group and be as welcome as anyone was in my social group of the same color. It's not even true that the social group of which I am a member of is unicolor. At the moment, it's already diverse, and that's again a mistake that Jared is making. We have diverse societies already in place. We have to learn to live in peace and productively together in that demand. Canada is the perfect example, the best example we have at the moment about diverse society. If you had asked the French, the English, the Germans in the 19th century, every one of them would have told you that there were deep differences between French, German, and English, that they are a different species. The Germans were the monsters, the French were the dissolute sexual ones, and the Brits were the toffee-nosed empire builders, the violent ones, rule Britannia. They would have spoken in exactly the same terms. Oh, the Brits will never live with the Germans. Never the Germans with the French. Never the French with the Spanish. Until, of course, the EU happens. And